The Lonely Cot. Lonely was the little cottage in which dwelt Silas Mitten, the hewer and chopper of firewood. It stood in a corner of a heath, with not another house near it, and all the winds could sweep over it unchecked from every quarter. It was a small patched-up place, with one little window at the side of the door, and above it another peeping from under the low thatched roof. The cottage had been scarcely large enough to hold Silas, his wife, and their 5 children, but now Mrs. Mitten was dead, and the eldest boy had gone to sea. The common looked pleasant enough in the summer, when the blossoms on the flags showed like white feathers round the patches of water, and the heather purpled the ground, and yellow furze dotted it with gold, and geese fed there, and donkeys browsed, and butterflies fluttered over the honeyed wildflowers. But a very dreary place looked the common in winter, when the heath was brown, and the blossoms dead, and the patches of water grew broader and larger, and all around them was swamp, till sharp frost turned the water into ice, and the north wind rushed wildly across the waste, and covered it with snow. Mitten's cottage was then a dreary abode indeed, for seldom did anyone care to go near it, and the wind not only swept over but through it, at least so it seemed to the dwellers therein. There was a little thatched outhouse or shed in front of the cottage, and from thence, hour after hour, as long as daylight lasted, might be heard the sound of chopping up wood. It was by this that Mitten gained his living, for, except in harvest time, and then rarely, he never worked as a day laborer for any of the farmers around. Wood chopping seemed to come as natural to the Mitten family as flying does to birds, or swimming to fishes. Mrs. Mitten had been chopping in the shed but the day before she died, and on the evening after the poor woman's funeral, when her sorrowing family returned from the churchyard, they set to chopping again. Mitten might be seen constantly at work, with his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, showing his hairy freckled arms as he steadily plied the hatchet. He was a hard-featured, stern-looking man, with rough grizzled chin, and cheeks shaven but once a month, and his appearance was that of one who had had a long struggle with want and care. Mitten's trials, however, had rather soured than subdued him. He was a prouder man in his cottage than Sir Marmaduke in his castle. The woodchopper was wont to tell his children on winter evenings how his grandfather's grandfather had been a gentleman, and a mighty rich one too, who had owned more acres of land in Shropshire than there were sedges round the pool, who had kept 20 hunters in his stables, and had gone up to London once every year in a family coach drawn by 6 fine grey horses. The little Mittens, shivering in their cold cottage, used to listen to their father's accounts of such grandeur in bygone days, much as they would have listened to fairy stories. They knew that they neither fared better, nor worked the less hard, because they bore the name of some grand squire who had lived at a time which seemed to them as far back as that of the deluge. The fine family coach was to the young woodchoppers much the same kind of thing as that which Cinderella's fairy in the story made out of a pumpkin. When the tale had been told, the cottage children went to their beds, and thought very little more about the grandeur of olden times. All but Amy, the eldest girl, a shy and thoughtful child, with large forehead and earnest brown eyes, which seemed never to rest on the objects near her, but to be looking for something beyond. As Amy's eyes, so was her mind. In her secluded cottage home, the girl was living in a little world of her own. When scrubbing the tile floor, or mending the linen, or chopping wood, for girls as well as boys passed most of their time at this work, Amy's thoughts were full of fancies suggested by her father's winter tales. She was imagining the grand times come again, her father living in a turreted castle 10 times as large as Sir Marmaduke's dwelling, and her brothers, Silas, Ned, and Joe each mounted on a prancing white horse with trappings of gold, and her dear mother dressed out in satin and gems, giving out loaves every Sunday to hundreds and hundreds of the poor. These were but foolish fancies, and Amy would have been ashamed to have told them to anyone but little May, her youngest sister, who would open wide her blue eyes and think how delightful it would be to ride in a carriage, and eat roast meat every day in the week. Amy's foolish daydreams only lasted till the time when, at a lady's request to her parents, she attended a village school, which was nearly 2 miles from her home. Then every day the little pale girl, with her bag on her arm, might be seen crossing the common. Amy was the quickest and most willing of scholars, her lessons were always well learned, she was ever ready with her answers, and the teacher regarded as her best pupil, the thin, stunted, sickly child, who seemed to take in the meaning of everything with her eyes. These were very happy times for poor Amy, though the walk to and from the school was almost too much for her strength, and wearily she dragged her limbs along before she reached her father's cottage. Amy was ill-clad and ill-fed, her frame had never been hardy, with her nothing seemed to grow but her mind. At the age of 12, which was hers when my story opens, Amy was little taller, and scarcely as heavy, as her sister May, who was but half that age. Amy's happy schooldays had not lasted for long. After the sudden death of her mother, the eldest girl of Mitten could no longer be spared from home. She must, young and fragile as she was, do the cleaning and cooking, the washing and mending, and help with the chopping besides. Amy never complained, and seldom cried except at night when everyone else was sleeping, but she felt her mother's loss keenly. She felt also her own weak health, for her strength was ebbing away day by day. Still the poor child went on with her labor as long as her small thin fingers could work, till one day she almost fainted in the shed, and never more was the chopper to be lifted by Amy Mitten. She did what she could in the cottage, but that little grew less and less, a terrible cough racked her frame, her head drooped as if its weight were too much for her strength to support, her appetite totally failed her, and Amy could never keep herself warm. Mitten did not appear to see the change in his daughter, or, if he did, it aroused his impatience, not his tenderness. Indeed, there was little of tenderness in the nature of Silas Mitten. "I wish that you would get rid of that trick of barking, child," would be the almost angry exclamation of the father, when disturbed by the cough which had broken Amy's rest half through the night. If, when he drove his bundles of wood in a donkey cart to the town, anyone who knew poor Amy inquired after her health, "Oh, she's well enough," he would say. Or, if he could not say that, Mitten's answer would be, "The child's a bit pinched with the cold, but she'll be all right in the spring." But spring came, and Amy was not all right. The March winds seemed to chill her slight frame, even more than the hard frosts of winter. With a bitter spirit Mitten saw his pale, patient little girl gradually fading away. If she'd common comforts, she would do well enough, he would mutter. If she had a rich man for her father, she'd not live in a cottage which lets the wind in like a sieve, she'd be wrapped up in velvets and shawls, and have a score of doctors, and they'd soon get the little one round. Mitten fell into the common mistake of thinking that money could do everything, and this had the effect of filling his soul with malice and envy towards those better off in the world than himself, as if what the rich possessed were something taken from the poor. Mitten had the savage feelings of a man who thinks that he has been pushed out of a place which is his by right, and Amy learned to dread anything recalling to her parent what his grandfather's grandfather had been in the past, for it always put him out of humor with everything in the present. Mitten would growl at his hard fare, abuse everyone above him in social position, or, if he were in a silent mood, hack savagely at his wood, looking as if it were by no means the only thing which he would willingly chop into pieces.